Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 4th edition of the Osasu Show Symposium. It's a beautiful day to be here. Today is Wednesday, the 9th of September. The time is 10 a.m. here in Nigeria's federal capital, Abuja. Before we begin, allow me to specially welcome our amazing audience joining us from 32 African countries and counting. It's amazing to have you here with us. Thank you. My name is Woliagba-YPM. I am a filmmaker, a master of ceremonies, but most importantly, a proud African. As many of you may know by now, the Osasu Show Symposium is a forum where key stakeholders converge to discuss salient issues regarding sustainable development, particularly as it pertains to the welfare and livelihood of less privileged citizens. TUS Symposium aims to foster dialogue that provokes social change, promotes inclusivity of women, youths, persons living with disabilities, amongst other vulnerable groups. Most importantly, the TUS Symposium has a proven track record of igniting conversations that lead to the formulation of policies and programs at both the state and the national level. I wouldn't want to bore you too much with a long speech, so we've put together highlights from the past 3 editions of the Osasu Show Symposium. So please, sit back and enjoy our mini documentary.
When we look back at the impact we've made through the show and its foundation, we're encouraged to do even more and take more risk.
How do I feel your presence through the work that you do?
If we want to address poverty, one critical element is infrastructure. It serves as stimulus to address poverty.
Apart from militocracy, politics is responsible for poverty and hunger in Nigeria. Unfortunately, we, the leaders, myself inclusive, have failed this nation.
The president has also currently approved new railway lines that he has asked us to go and look for loans.
If you listen to the speakers, they talked about borrowing, credit, loan. It is our generation that would pay for that.
I do not see any other way you can hold a government responsible or accountable than that power of the ballot.
I am delighted to welcome you here to the 2nd edition of the Osasu Show Symposium. Leadership must translate to taking responsibility and building a legacy of stewardship and accountability. Many of those who participated in last year's symposium have since conversed with the passage of critical legislation that will ensure youth participation in governance.
I know exactly in terms of my competence, my character and my capacity that I am well positioned to find solutions to the problems that ail us.
We need to grow our economy. We need to get ourselves united. Who's going to pity us when we start slaughtering our own necks? Everybody's sending us rice from their own country just because we have the largest number of IDP, internally displaced people in a country that is not at war.
Elections even in America is not wishful thinking or oratory. You can therefore not win the presidential election in Nigeria by just merely having a beautiful manifesto. No!
It's the 3rd edition of the Osasu Show Symposium, and it's such an honor and a privilege to put this event together every single year, year in and year out, and just watching the amazing people that travel from far and near to come here and attend this.
All the people who have ruled us, not governed. We have never been governed. We have been ruled over the years, are men.
When she's educated, when girls, women are educated, there is a greater chance of escaping poverty, leading healthier and more productive lives, and raising the standard of living children, families, and community.
To go beyond what men are prepared to offer, the women must stand toe-to-toe and say, we have the capacity to make it happen for women.
60% of our population is youthful, and we need to put them to work. Otherwise, they're going to get into social vagrancies that we can't afford either.
We must acknowledge the incredible work that the forebears of feminism in our country have done. But we must ask ourselves, despite the enormity of the work they have done, how come we are still at 6.4% representation for women?
Now, as you can see, there are no holds barred at TOS conferences. We pride ourselves in taking words directly from the mouths of everyday Nigerians straight to the ears of their leaders and vice versa. The COVID-19 pandemic has created an even bigger necessity for conversations like this to happen more frequently. But I think I'll let the convener and founder of the Osasu Show Symposium talk a little bit more about this. Please, permit me to introduce one of Africa's most impactful journalists. Her work spans all geographical zones of this continent from east to west, from north to south. Miss Osasu Igbeneghan has been there, digging deep into the fabric of respective societies, asking pertinent questions, investigating social ills and its plaguing impact on Africa's developmental strides. Osasu consistently strives to anchor conversations and interviews around sustainable solutions that catalyze economic prosperity for all Africans, hence our being here today. It is my honor and extreme privilege to welcome to the stage the Chief Executive Officer of Tostvnetwork, the Executive Director of TOS Foundation and the convener of this auspicious conference, Chief Miss Osasu Igbeneghan, who will be delivering her opening remarks. Please welcome her.
Thank you so much, Mali. Thank you once again, Mali, and thank you everyone for being here. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to address you at the 4th edition of the Osasu Show Symposium. The world, as we all know, was taken aback by the global pandemic that struck most nations earlier this year. Words are not enough to describe the havoc caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, especially to families who lost loved ones. My prayer is that the Almighty God will comfort the bereaved and give those of us whose lives were spared a rethink to how we operate not only in business, but purposefully across board. The theme of this year's symposium is Rethinking Africa. This conversation is timely, given the lessons the pandemic has taught us regarding the need to be self-sufficient. We can no longer afford to rely wholly on a single commodity, or worse off, foreign aid. We saw how each nation and union began hauling for themselves personal protective equipment, ventilators, and medication at the initial stages of the pandemic. Most powerful nations bought up majority of life-saving supplies, leaving the poorer nations scrambling for peanuts. As Africans, it became clear that we have no one to rely on but ourselves. Not our international development partners, not our major trade partners, just us, Africans. It has therefore become imperative to devise homegrown solutions to the plethora of issues plaguing Africa. As a matter of urgency, we must rethink our policies, our politics, and the way we do business. Intra-Africa trade remains at an abysmally low 18%, compared to intra-European trade at 69%, intra-Asia trade at 59%, and NAFTA at 55%. In 2017, at the maiden edition of the Osasu Show Symposium themed The New Economy and Its Impact on Less Privileged Citizens, I spoke about the need for the Nigerian government to rapidly digitize its economy in order for the average citizen to stand a chance at contributing to the collective wealth of the nation while harnessing their innovator potentials. While these discussions led to policy changes at the state level, I was perplexed to find out little to no attempt was made at the national level to increase budgetary provisions for the Ministry of Science and Technology, whose mandate would be to support innovators in devising mechanisms that would transition the nation seamlessly to the global new economy. Across Africa, leaders have paid lip service to technological advancement. Therefore, our journey from poverty towards prosperity is stunted by lack of African-tailored technological innovations, crippling national debt, loss of sovereignty over strategic and critical resources to global superpowers, but perhaps most significantly, by uninspired leadership. The year 2020 is a defining year in the shifting of global social, political, technological, and economic order. The post-COVID new normal creates both opportunities and challenges for nation-states that disrupt entire industries and national competitive advantages. When we think of the world's biggest and fastest-growing industries, we think of clean energy, technology, manufacturing. But how many of these industries can survive without Africa's resources? For Africa, this is a time to leverage our immense human and natural resources towards positioning our continent as the new investment destination of choice for the global economy. Can you imagine what Africa can become if the African Union prohibited the export of unrefined raw materials and unprocessed cash crops outside the continent? You see, the world cannot operate nuclear power plants without enriching Africa's uranium and plutonium. The world cannot advance technology without Africa's coltan used to build microchips and cobalt used to make lithium-ion batteries that store power for mobile phones, tablets, electric cars, and even space rockets. These examples are just scratching the surface of the global dependence on Africa. We therefore have the opportunity and the potential to force developed nations to invest in value creation on the African continent. Rather than selling our resources as commodities, we can become valuable and strategic partners to these foreign nations that depend on us for the advancement of their own economies. In an age of unprecedented investments in digital economies, artificial intelligence, and automation as key drivers for sustainable economic growth, Africa must wake up. We must recognize that the challenge before us today is to leapfrog to the global new economy. We must use what we have to become self-sufficient. We need to commit ourselves to investment in human capital development, as this is the most important and critical resource of any nation and any continent. We must rededicate ourselves to the principles of democracy in electing leaders with vision, leaders with capacity that will uplift our trajectory. Finally, we must truly respect the rule of law in order to give confidence to ourselves as Africans and our investors. I believe in a reimagined Africa, where African leaders, captains of industries, and everyday patriots like you and I are recognized and respected locally and internationally, despite the challenges we confront. Today's symposium is a timely reminder to us all that Africa is of age, and the time is now. We must break out of our stereotypes and define a new age of good governance and prosperity for all people. I've said enough, so I wish us all a fruitful deliberation ahead. May God bless the United Nations of Africa.
Thank you. I think we can do better. Can we get another round of applause for the convener of this auspicious occasion? She's a national treasure and we appreciate her so much. Thank you so much, Chief Miss Osasu Idbinejan. That was a remarkable speech. So, to be honest, when she reached out to me to MC this event, I was immediately drawn to the theme, Rethinking Africa. As a son of parents from Ghana, but having lived across multiple countries on this continent, I consider myself an African first, before I consider myself a national of any country. I genuinely believe that Africa must unite, just as our convener has expressed. And I'm sure our first keynote speaker, who is standing by, will agree with me and perhaps even speak a little bit more on this. Professor Kingsley Moghalu, it is an honor to have you here with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Professor Kingsley Moghalu is the president and CEO of Sogata Strategies LLC, a global strategy and risk advisory firm in Washington, D.C. He was professor of practice in international business and public policy at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University in Massachusetts, USA, and previously served as Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria from 2009 to 2014. He has served on high-level international appointment in the United Nations, including as a member of the Intergovernment Expert Group on Financing for Development at the UN Conference on Trade and Development in Geneva, and as a member of the high-level redesign panel on the United Nations Internal Justice System in New York, and also worked for the UN for 17 years. in strategic planning, legal and external affairs roles at duty stations at the UN headquarters in New York and in Cambodia, Croatia, Rwanda and Switzerland, rising to the highest career rank of director.
Thank you very much for having me as the keynote speaker at the 4th edition of the Osasu Show Symposium with the theme, Rethinking Africa. I'm very pleased to be with you, and I think the topic of this edition is very timely considering the coronavirus pandemic and its huge implications for the whole world and for Africa in particular. We're going to be going into a very different world after the coronavirus epidemic. In the context of the theme, I am going to be speaking about human capital development and how we can harness the potential of Africa's youth population. And permit me to say a few words about that. Now, in the world in which we are, rethinking Africa means that we have to take a second look at Africa's possibilities in the world today, especially the world as it's going to be shaped after the COVID crisis. This requires us to rethink the continent's future. And first of all, we have to recognize that we have to consciously own and shape our continent's future. This requires, in my view, that we develop a very robust kind of worldview as Africans. What is our view of the world? What is our interpretation of the world and our place in it? So this is very, very important and very fundamental. We need to know where we're coming from. We need to know where we're going. We need to know how we are going to get to where we're going. And we need to have a value system, a knowledge system, a strategy, a plan of action. That's the mindset with which we should be looking at rethinking Africa and the possibilities for Africa's youth. Now, Africa faces two realities today. One is the reality of poverty, that too many people in the continent remain poor. This is a fact. That's number one. So we need a new way of thinking about creating wealth. What is the approach we're taking to development? I believe that we should take an approach to development that is as follows. One, we need to understand that development is a holistic concept. It involves three different things. One, human capital development. That is to say, the quality of the lives of our populations. Do we have potable drinking water? Do we have basic health care, especially in today's world of the COVID crisis? We've found that our health infrastructure needs to be improved, even though African governments have responded as best they can. Do we have education and skills? Do we have a good educational system? What is the lifespan of most people in the continent? So these are the questions of basic development, that is human development. The second aspect is economic growth. We focus too much on this aspect and we ignore the first aspect. We talk a lot about our GDP growth, which is the overall combination of our production of every national economy in a given year of goods and services. So because we focus too much on GDP growth, we do not pay attention to human development. So this is a second dimension of development. The third dimension of development is structural economic transformation. That is to say that the structure of our economies needs to change. We need to become productive economies. We need to become innovative economies. We need to become manufacturing economies. We need to be able to export products, goods and services across the African continent, amongst our African countries, and beyond Africa into the rest of the world. So you have human development, you have economic growth, and then you have structural economic transformation. Too many African countries are not able to achieve structural economic transformation because they rely on commodities. They rely on natural resources with no value added. And these are the things that expose our countries to to the vagaries of the global market, and we are not able to be stable. When the oil price, for example, goes down, our economies of countries that rely on oil, begin to wobble. And this is not a sustainable model of development. So this is the first approach we must take. We need to take hundreds of millions of Africans out of poverty and into the middle class. That is structural transformation with human development and economic growth. So that's briefly dealing with the first reality. The second reality that we face in our continent is the reality of population growth. Africa today is a continent of 1.3 billion people. About 60% of that population is below the age of 25. So we have a youth bulge in Africa, and this trend will continue. Today, the median age in Africa is about 19. By the time we get to about 2046, it could rise to about 25 as the median age. What does this mean? It means that as we plan the future, as we own our future, as we redesign the African future, it is basically a future that will be dominated by young people. We don't want a population bulge in Africa where you have hundreds of millions of young people who do not have the right skills and the right education to be productive. Because when you do that, when you allow such a situation to occur, then you're setting your country or your continent up for social and political instability. And so you find a lot of these young people going into armies, terrorism. There's a lot of unemployment, very high rate of unemployment in the continent. And because the countries, the economies of many African countries are informal, it's not even possible for us to be able to know our exact rates of youth unemployment. So this is a very important part of redesigning our future. So what do we need to do? What do we need to do in response to this challenge? I say we need to do the following. We need to invest in education. We need to invest in skills for Africa's youth. We need to invest in an educational system that changes the way we learn, that reforms the curriculum, more towards entrepreneurship, more towards vocational skills, more towards innovation, so that our young people can have practical skills when they come out of educational institutions. So we need to redesign our curriculum to about 60 to 70% science, technology, and entrepreneurship, and 30 to 40% other things. This is what I think we need to do in order to equip our youth in Africa to be able to take their destiny in their hands in the world after the COVID crisis. Now, what exactly does this mean? This means that we need to invest a lot more in social infrastructure in the continent. That is investments in education, investments in the healthcare system, so that we can meet that original challenge of human development and provide jobs for our youth through new entrepreneurships, new businesses that they will be able to set up because they are equipped with the knowledge to set up those kinds of businesses. Now, when you equip them with the knowledge, the vocational skills, the entrepreneurship knowledge, what then happens? They need finance. So African countries need to invest a lot more or create investments in venture capital so that venture capital can come into our continent and invest in new businesses. So after we have trained young people in technical and vocational skills and technology and entrepreneurship, they need to be able to set up new businesses with capital that is equity capital, not credit. There's too much credit in African countries, but not enough, ownership, equity capital. And this is what our young people need. We need to have massive venture capital funds that are public and private, mostly private, but the public sector can invest in them as well. And these funds will be able to give young people, they should be able to give equity, finance, and become part owners in the new businesses that these young people will set up. And maybe after 4 or 5 years, when those businesses get to a certain level of profitability, the investing funds can withdraw and the young people can own the businesses wholly. But this is a far better way to make progress than just giving people credit. Because, getting credit in Africa is not easy. There's too many requirements for collateral, and many young people cannot meet these requirements. So equity capital, in which they invest in venture capital funds, and these young men and women co-own the businesses that they will be starting with the skills they have obtained from different types of educational systems, that's the way to go. So this is my view, this is my vision. We need to focus on tackling poverty in a structural manner. We need to focus on economic growth that is inclusive. We need to focus on structural economic transformation. That's part one. Part two, we need to deal with our youth bulge. Is our huge burgeoning population an opportunity, or is it a problem? We can turn it into a population if we invest in our youth in the way we should, by reforming our educational system, by giving them the skills, and by giving them the capital to start new businesses. So that's my, my brief keynote opening remarks. I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you, and I hope that this conference will have the kind of outcomes that we can actually put into action for progress in our different African countries, whether it's in West Africa, in Central Africa, in East Africa, or in Southern Africa.
Professor Molo, I think we should be the ones thanking you. Thank you so much for your time. I do believe there are many take-homes from what you've just expressed, but for me what stood out the most was your comments about the need to know where we're coming from in order to see or know where it is that we're going. For me, that was just absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you, MC. Thank you, Osasu, for inviting me. I hope these conversations lead to concrete action with good outcomes across the continent. And I hope that all Africans listening will make a resolve to put some of these ideas and all of our collective ideas at this event into action for practical effect that will bring prosperity and progress for our continent in the years to come.
You're very welcome, Dr. Mohalu. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, as you can see, our audience looks pretty fired up, and I hope those of you at home are just as excited, because it's time to delve into the first panel session of today. Now, this panel deals with the peculiarities of leadership on the African continent, particularly in an era of a global pandemic. I am very excited about this panel because of the key leadership roles that these high-profile personalities have held and continue to hold. Who better to speak with us about rethinking Africa than the very men and women who have assumed the highest office in their respective nations? Ladies, gentlemen, please put your hands together as I welcome past presidents Goodluck Jonathan of Nigeria and Joyce Banda of Malawi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome, and thank you both for joining us on the 4th edition of the Osasu Show Symposium. President Banda, I would love to start with you if that's okay. Much has been written about the devastating economic impact of the COVID-19 crisis on women and girls specifically. From the work that you've led on the continent, what are you seeing regarding gender inequality around you?
First and foremost, let me say how delighted I am that we're discussing this, because I am really devastated. I'm heartbroken because the impression that I get just watching what is happening across Africa is that we have lost a lot of the gains that we have made since 1995 when we went to Beijing, in as far as gender equality is concerned. I'm devastated because here in Malawi, and I'm hearing across Africa as well, there are a lot of girls dropping out of school. They are not going to school for the last 6 months anyway. So there's a lot of teen pregnancies. There's a lot of teen marriages. In Malawi, in one district alone, in the last 3 months, 15,000 girls have become pregnant. And if some of us who have spent our entire adult life trying to send as many girls as possible to school, that's a great loss. And I know that this is happening across Africa. Secondly, we see an increase also in gender-based violence. We are having difficulties explaining that we all find ourselves in this situation, but then women have become the victims. In South Africa alone, every 6 hours, a woman is being killed. What is it that we can do? That is the discussion now. So if you ask me, what are we seeing? There's a lot of girls dropping out of school. There's a lot of gender-based violence, but worse still, there's a lot of poverty, because there are so many countries that are on lockdown, shut down, restrictions, curfews. So in most of our people on the continent of Africa, 15% are urban-based and well-to-do. 85% are locked up in abject poverty before COVID-19. So what's going on now is that because they live on daily subsistence, hand to mouth, they go to the market, sell, buy, and they have a meal for that day. Because now they can't go out, people are locked up in their homes and are starving. Governments are not able in most parts of Africa to provide food packs to poor families. They are not able to even support education in most parts of Africa. I'm talking about supporting children to have access to online education. So children are not learning and are not going to school. So if you ask me what am I seeing in Africa during COVID-19, it is devastating that we as women are helplessly standing there watching all the gains that we made being lost.
That sounds devastating, but people like you show us that there is always hope. So I need to ask you, how are you reflecting on the increased gendered impact that you've just reeled out?
I'm worried. Most importantly, what I'm worried about is just thinking about what is it that we can do post-COVID-19. Number one, there's no sign that it is going anywhere anytime soon. But then looking at that eventuality where we will say the vaccine is here, there's no more COVID-19, how do we begin to pick up the pieces and begin to build again? I'm looking at the situation where in America, in Europe, we are all affected with COVID-19. The children of America, by age 2, they are playing on the computer. In Africa, in Malawi, a child will go all the way to high school before they see a computer. This then affects the possibility of them having access to online learning, to homeschooling. So when they are not going to school, they are not learning. So we are leaving a whole generation behind. What is it that we can do to make sure that we don't lose a whole generation in Africa? Because while they are not going to school, and while children in Europe and America are not going to school, but they are learning at home, what is it that we can do? I am thinking that the world will never be the same again. So we need to move very quickly to be innovative in providing education to our children, in ending poverty, in achieving gender equality. We must rethink on what we can do to make sure that there's some normalcy beyond COVID-19, when COVID-19 is gone. And in Rethinking Africa, I believe that it will start with political will. Governments across Africa must decide that they are going to include women and include girls in that recovery program. I have been saying for the longest time that Africa must focus on the girl child from ages 0 to 10. Usually, our partners will come and support us in focusing on the girl child, the adolescent girl child. And my argument has always been that that is too late. There's so much harm that happens between the ages of 0 to 10. And that will get worse as a result of COVID-19. These are the girls who are sitting at home, they are being defiled, they are getting married, and the ones that got married, the 15,000 I talked about earlier in Malawi, are between the ages of 10 to 14. So we need to pay a lot of attention to the eradication of harmful traditions that negatively impact on our girl child. We must begin. We have seen the role that African women have played in growing our economies across the continent. As business women, as market women, which is what is not happening now. In looking forward, the strategy should be to make sure that the microfinance institutions, banks, are paying special attention to those women who are entrepreneurs anyway. African women don't just sit back and wait for handouts. African women wake up early in the morning, work 14 hours a day to bring a meal to their table, to work, to go to the market. That is not happening now. Governments, then, there should be political will to ensure that these women have access to income. They have access to income through income generation. Because when a woman brings income into the poor household, the household benefits. They have they have better nutrition, better health, and better education for children, including girls.
Thank you so much, President Banda. You have given us a lot to think about. We'd like to move on to President Jonathan. President Jonathan, your name resonates in the minds of not just Nigerians, but Africans across the continent. You are popular for entrenching democracy within the fabric of Nigerian society, where men and women, boys and girls, were able to speak freely without fear of reprisal from your government. Can you talk to us a little bit about the role of democracy, electoral reforms, but most importantly, the power of the people in rethinking Africa?
Thank you. I'm delighted to participate in this 4th edition of the Osasu Show Symposium. I believe this conversation is critical and relevant, especially considering the adjustment to the new normal. Of course, you recollect that since I left office, I've been involved in consolidating democracy across the continent of Africa. I've been leading a number of election observation missions in countries that have elections. And this is a topic that is dear to me because the whole world wants development. African nations want development. And for you to develop as a nation, the governance structure is critical. Who manages the affairs of the states? Who manages the affairs of the nations? And in the democratic setting, that these people are elected, it is very, very critical that you elect the right person. But the topic talks about democracy, electoral reforms, and power to the people. And let me start with power to the people. Because in a democracy, the power belongs to the people. And a democracy is a government that is participated by all the people, especially the citizens that are raised the age of voting in Nigeria, 18, and most other countries. This is done through voting people to represent the people. So the power is in the people. And for the power to be in the people, that means that the ballot papers, the voters' card that the citizens use must be relevant. The voters' card must decide who wins an election at all levels. If you take the Nigerian scenario, from the level of a councillor, local government chairman, a House of Representative member, a House of Assembly member, and Senate, governors, and president. These people must emerge through the ballot papers dictated by the voters' card of the citizens. And any situation where the winners of this election are not brought up from the ballots, then of course it is not a democracy. You can at best say they are running what I describe as pseudo-democracy, but it's not a democracy. So we begin to ask ourselves, especially in Africa, our countries that conduct regular elections, democratic, there's this tendency for people to believe that elections determine what a democratic establishment is in nations. No. Periodic election is just a component of the practice of democracy. For elections to be democratic, that means that the outcome of the elections must depend on the ballots, not any other institution. not even the court. If the ballots don't decide who wins, then we are not practicing democracy. And if we allow a situation where people use force of arms, using talks, that is well in Nigeria, to win the election, then we can't say we are practicing democracy. Elections must be free and fair, and must be credible, and must be seen to be credible. That is the tenets of democracy. And until we get to that point, you cannot even elect leaders that will listen to the people. If somebody wins the election, say a governor wins the election, through some other means other than the votes of the citizens of that state, how will he listen to the citizens? Because he knows that even in his next election, he will do the same thing, and he will continue to be a governor. But it is when our ballot papers matters, then the people who are voting in to represent us in a democratic setting will do what we want them to do. Because if they don't do what we want them to do, the same ballot papers we use in voting them in, the same cards we use in voting them in, we will use to vote them out. In that case, when you are holding an elective office, you know that you represent the people, and you will do what will please the people. How do we get there? That is the second leg, talk about electoral reforms. Most countries in Africa have been undergoing electoral reforms. But there are key things about electoral reforms that would really institutionalize democracy. One thing is that the reforms must talk about the electoral management bodies, the bodies that conduct elections. If you take the African setting, there are some countries that have independent parastatals that manage elections. In Nigeria, we call it INEC, Independent National Electoral Commission. In some other countries in Africa, especially the Francophone countries, it's departments of government that manage the elections. In most cases, the Ministry of Territorial Administration that manages the election. But whether a department of government is managing the election directly, or we set up an independent body that manages the elections, are they really independent? The key thing is independence, not in the name. You can call an institution of government, parastatal of government, independent body. But if in practice they are not independent, then the name is false. So a department of government can actually conduct elections that will be free and fair. It's been done in a number of African countries, which I have also observed. So the key thing is that body independent of the influence of people, either in government or outside government. Are they doing the right thing? The people who are supposed to win the elections, are they winning the elections? And in countries where the process goes through courts, are the courts also doing the right thing? Are they looking at the laws the way they should look at the laws? Are the judges or justices influenced by people to take decisions that are quite against the citizens? In Nigeria, we've listened to so many judgments given by lower tribunals made up of judges and sometimes magistrates, appeal tribunals made up of appeal justices, and the Supreme Court panels made up of justices of the Supreme Court. So it's not just about manipulating results on the voting day, but also when it passed through the judicial system, how they take final decisions on these matters are critical. To me, if Africa especially will move forward, it's not just about routine conduct of elections. This year alone, in West Africa, made up of 15 states, we have 5 states that have elections. So in terms of regular elections, we are progressing. But are these elections credible? And they really represent a constitutional democratic setting is the issue. Regular elections, fine. But elections per se, it's not democracy. If the votes of the citizens don't count, then it's as good as military dictatorship. So for me, the reforms should first gear towards making the votes count and taking a critical examination about the way elections have been conducted across the continent, from at least the ones I've observed. I've seen that the only thing that we must do to get there is through electronic voting. People may feel, yes, people could manipulate smart boys who can hack into the system and do all kinds of things, yes. But still, people still use the electronic system to move hundreds of millions of dollars across the world. So I still believe very sincerely that that is the way to go. And of course, the electoral management bodies must be made up of men and women that are credible enough not to listen to people who influence society, either from government or outside government. And the security operatives that manage the elections must also be neutral and don't play politics with their job. The reforms has to go in these directions. And there must be severe punishment that will be given to electoral offenders. Just like in Nigeria, people are proposing the establishment of the Electoral Offences Commission. And the committee that I chaired when I was the vice president during the reforms, during Yar'Adua's political reforms, made that recommendation that people who commit offenses during elections, when the elections are declared and the appeal tribunals take decision, it ends there. Why will it end there? People have committed electoral offenses. A department, the special department of government, should take over, because some of the electoral offenses are committed by the police, and it's difficult for the police to investigate themselves. And that's why you need a department of government that will not participate in the managing the election. Now to take charge of managing the fallout of the election. So when people commit political offenses during election, electoral offenses, it's not just about winning or losing, but there must be a follow-up, proper investigation, so that people are punished for offenses committed. And if that is done over a period of time, we will now begin to develop a clear culture of democracy, because democracy should be about how people live their lives. When we develop to that level, where it becomes a part of our culture, then you can say, Africa, we are moving forward democratically. I thank you.
Thank you so much for that in-depth remark, President Jonathan. I do believe you've just given us a timely reminder that we, the people, wield enormous power. We wield enormous responsibility in our goal in moving Africa towards prosperity. I'd like to return now to President Banda. I have a question for you from social media, if you would like to just answer that quickly. So we have at Hive Cole. The question is, in Rethinking Africa, what can women, or specifically African women, do differently to achieve inclusion and access to leadership?
And in Rethinking Africa, I believe that it will start with political will. When we went to Beijing in 1995, we agreed that we were going to go back home and find our way to the policy formulating tables. We are going to get back, we are going to get into leadership. And I remember me asking Gertrude Mongere, how are we going to go back and get into leadership, particularly parliament? You're telling us to get there. But men are already sitting in those seats. And she laughed, looked at me and said, well, push them if you can, but you must get into leadership. We came back to Africa. We worked extremely hard. African women are hard working and focused. And we went all the way to those leadership positions. As I'm speaking to you now, African women have done better than most. Africa has had 5 female presidents. Liberia, Central African Republic, Malawi, Mauritius, and now Ethiopia. I mean, there are some very highly developed nations where 200 years later, they don't have the first female president. So we've done better than most. Number 2, the country with the highest number of women in parliament in the world is on the continent of Africa, Rwanda. And one president after another is appointing 50% of their cabinet being women, including the African Union itself. So we should be proud as a continent that we've done well. So what is it that women can do to increase the number of the participation of women in leadership? Is to continue to engage our men. We shall have our own style of feminism. We shall not fight our men. We shall not be confrontational. We shall not march on the streets to achieve gender equality. We shall engage the men. We shall sit down on the table. Because at the end of the day, they are the ones who have to open space at the policy formulating tables for us to sit there. And I know that in a country like Rwanda, President Kagame has achieved 50% cabinet, but 63% women in parliament. Did they march? Did they scream at the president? South Africa has achieved 50% cabinet. Did they scream at President Ramaphosa? Our men have to be engaged, and with all respect, sitting together and engaging them and discussing about the future. If you insist men are the problem, well, men will be the problem, but men will be the solution as well. But we know that our brothers know that historically African women were leaders. Even before colonization, we led our nations. And so therefore, when colonization came, as far as I'm concerned, and what I've read, is that it is even colonization that pulled us back. And when our brothers started fighting for freedom, Kwame Nkrumah and the other leaders on the continent, women rose to the occasion and fought side by side with their brothers. Therefore, our brothers on the continent, the men on the continent, understand fully that women, this continent will develop only and only when women are part of the movement to prosper our nations, to transform our nations. Women must be there. So women themselves have already decided that they are going to form networks. As I'm speaking to you now, we have a very strong women's network at the African Union called the African Women Leaders Network, an initiative of African Union as well as the UN Women. And with that, we are targeting the younger generation. So it has an intergenerational concept. We have young and older women like myself working together, mobilizing fellow women on the continent, being the voice for the voiceless, taking leadership positions. And I know from experience, because I did it, that when women get into leadership, this is another part of the response to you, is that when we get into leadership, we should therefore strive to reach out and pull other women into leadership. You know that here in Malawi, when I was president, that's the first time this country had a female chief justice. It is the first time this country had the first head of civil service. This is the country, that was the time when this country had the first solicitor general, 8 district commissioners, 100 appointments, 46% in a diplomatic service. But also, that is the time when I became the first woman chair of SADC, that we appointed the first executive secretary of SADC, being a woman. So that is what we should do. We can't sit back. We've never sat back and waited for handouts. That is not an African woman. We work, we rise, we raise our voices as well. And that's what we must continue to do.
Thank you so much, President Banda. I believe women all across the continent are inspired by your words and your actions. Personally, you've reignited my belief that Africa truly is rising, and I am super proud to be identified with this. President Jonathan, President Banda, thank you so much for your time and your efforts. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you immeasurably.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be part of this event. Truly privileged to have had the opportunity to share my views with you. And it is my sincere hope that this discussion yields tangible results.
Thank you so much. Audience, I hope you are feeling okay, but what do you say we take a quick break, and when we return, we hear from some youths and entrepreneurs across the African continent on what's been said so far and what Rethinking Africa means to them. You okay with that? All right, I do believe we have an agreement, so let's take a short intermission. When we get back, we're going to have a lot more for you. We are just getting started, so please don't go anywhere.
Everything is changed nowadays. Funny how we can't even play no more. It was only yesterday when we party every day. Now it's blood on the dance floor. All because of the virus. But it can't kill the power inside us to stand together and defeat Corona.
أنا وياك هالبارح نهني نقول هانيا. تبع things are changing لكل قلب نرد شوية. نخرجوا إن شاء الله نعيشوا إن شاء الله. Cause nobody is safe until everybody's safe. Tuamini nalo litakwisha na tena tutalishinda tu. Tupambane hii vita tumshinde COVID-19. Tuna kila sababu ya kuwajali wengine. Tafadhali tujilinde, tuwalinde, tuamue sasa.
One day my people, one day we'll be celebrating, cause this plague is over. Nothing will be separating us, cause nobody is safe until everybody is safe. Oh, everybody is safe. Oh.
Rain no go fall forever. Sun goes to shine, my sister. We go beat Corona if we stand together. If we stand in solidarity, we no go fit to fall down, fall down. Yeah, me I like that. Me I like you and I know you like me too. Me I love you and I know you love me too. We gonna spread the word and not divide us so. Nobody is safe until everybody is safe. Oh, me I want to be safe. Oh, oh, me bush and cheese. Feels like we lost me, babe. We'll pick up the pieces, start over. All the tears will be all over. Can you mean it will be much closer? For now we scream and shout.
One day my people, one day we'll be celebrating, cause this plague is over. Nothing will be separating us, cause nobody is safe until everybody is safe. Oh, everybody is safe. One day my people, one day we'll be celebrating, cause this plague is over. Nothing will be separating us, cause nobody is safe until everybody is safe. Oh, everybody is safe. Oh.
Je passe un gros big up à tous ceux qui font le taf. Dans les hôpitaux, la tristesse sous les masques. Mister Coro nous a piqué dans la face. On a tous peur, quoi qu'on dise, quoi qu'on fasse. On va gagner, gagner, gagner. À nous la victoire, notre histoire, elle va changer. Tous les jours, les soirs, c'est la messe. Frérot, tu sais, Coro nous a tous mis dans la S.
Mothers are kings and fathers are queens. You reign in your quest for the truth and strive in your sleep. The people in your past can relate, your victory great. I saw you on the shits in your graves, your fathers relate. Many cries now, but they never beat the sunrise. Swinging in your fight and we waiting for your come right. Your faith gon' heal you, heaven gon' keep you. I'm praying that the sun never leaves you. I feel you here.
Hey, se não nos unirmos agora, tudo que construímos outrora, destruímos agora. É melhor nos munirmos agora. O futuro das crianças decidimos agora. Covid não escolhe cor, somos todos alvos. Enquanto não tivermos todos, ninguém tá salvo. A mensagem é básica, para não mudarmos o nome da Mama África para Mama Lágrima.
Låt mig det ska kunna i alla fall. ከቆሙ መታደግ ይቻላል። One day my people, one day we'll be celebrating, cause this plague is over. Nothing will be separating us, cause nobody is safe until everybody is safe. Oh, everybody is safe. Oh. One day my people, one day we'll be celebrating, cause this plague is over. Nothing will be separating us, cause nobody is safe until everybody is safe. Oh, everybody is safe. Oh. One day my people, one day we'll be celebrating, cause this plague is over. Nothing will be separating us, cause nobody is safe until everybody is safe. Oh, everybody is safe. Oh.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. We are still watching the 4th edition of the Osasu Show Symposium. My name is Mike-Bamiloye, and I remain your MC for the day. Before we went on intermission, we heard from individuals that have held very sensitive positions in government. They spoke about the role of leadership in rethinking Africa. Right now, we will hear from youths across Africa who have distinguished themselves in the fields of entrepreneurship and entertainment. TOSTVNetwork strongly believes the voices of the youths is key in rethinking Africa. As we've heard from the first keynote speaker, the median age of Africa's population is 25 years. A decade from now, it will fall to 19. That means the voices of the youth can no longer be ignored. Therefore, it is my singular honor to welcome the panelists for the role of the youth and entrepreneurs in rethinking Africa. Allow me to introduce one of Africa's finest entrepreneurs. His name is Woliagba-YPM, but I'm sure most of you popularly know him by his stage name, Banky W, and he's also credited in film as Banky Wellington. Thank you so much for joining us, brother. You look great, and
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'd also like to introduce the youngest presidential aspirant leading up to the 2019 elections here in Nigeria. He is Mr. Chike Okeke, and he is an educator, tech entrepreneur, humanitarian, and engineer who is passionate about curbing youth disconnection, poverty, educational disadvantage, and opportunity divide in underrepresented communities. He joins us all the way from New York, and it is an absolute pleasure having you here with us.
Thank you.
Last but not the least, we have Korepete Kalaute from South Africa. He is an advocate for the girl child and women empowerment. Korepete runs many small businesses, and it is an absolute pleasure to have you here with us, Mr. Kalaute.
Thank you.
Now, as I said earlier, we as African youths have an integral role to play in Africa's development. Therefore, our voices must be heard and included in the plan to reshape and repurpose our trajectory. I'd like to delve right in by calling each of our panelists to give their remarks. So if I may start, Mr. Banky Wellington, over to you.
It truly is an honor and a privilege for me to be here to share some thoughts about rethinking Africa. And today I'll be speaking from the perspective of being an entertainer and an entrepreneur, but I'll be speaking very specifically as a Nigerian. Because in the last few months, a good number of the most brilliant, intelligent, brightest, and hopeful young minds that I've ever worked with in Nigeria have relocated abroad to Canada or several other countries. I've lost some of the most talented, resourceful, just the most brilliant people that I've ever come across. We've lost to greener pastures abroad. I'm talking about lawyers and IT professionals and entertainers and fashion designers and people in tech and in banking and brand managers and just people in all walks of life. We've lost them to greener pastures abroad. And I think that that's what today's conference is all about. Can we rethink Africa? Can we rethink our individual countries like Nigeria? Can we rethink our approach and try to make things a bit better? And so today I want to share 3 quick thoughts about how we can rethink Africa. The first one is belief. Now, I don't mean to sound like a preacher, but I'd like to paraphrase one of my favorite scriptures by saying, where your treasure is, there your heart is also. So what that means to me is that wherever you invest your treasure or a part of your treasure, then that's proof of where your heart is. So if our hearts are truly in Nigeria or Africa, then that's where our investments will be. And that's why I've had the journey that I've had in entertainment and now in the media agency space. We believed enough in our own talents and skills, and that's why we invested in floating a record label called EME, which is now a media agency. But we invested in that record label because we believed in my talent and in the talents of the other young people that I found, enough to put our money where our mouths were and where our hearts were. And that label has now given birth to some of Africa's brightest musical talents and artists and producers and engineers and people that work in the entertainment business. It's the same story in the movie side with Nollywood. We believed in our ability to tell stories, our own stories. And that's what has given birth to Nollywood and why Nollywood is making the strides that it's making and why films are doing the way that they're doing now. We still have a long way to go, but as we speak, Nollywood is the second highest employer of labor in Nigeria. Point two is care. Care enough about the state of things to be part of something that is bigger than yourself, that is bigger than your own personal chase for success. See, everywhere you turn in Nigeria and everywhere you turn in Africa, you'll find problems, one after another. Some of these problems have existed for decades. But it's not enough anymore for us to just point fingers and complain, because talk is cheap and talk is easy. It's much more difficult to do something about what you see that is going wrong. So if you truly care about where we are as a country or where we are as a continent, then care enough to do something about it. You can participate in community service, you can donate to a charitable effort, you can participate in protests or politics or something. Just care enough to do something about where you've seen that we are. Be frustrated enough to do more than just talking and tweeting. Care enough to do something about it. In the very least, care enough to pay attention to who is participating in our politics, because they're the people that are setting the policies that we're all living and dying by. And so if you're not going to get involved in it yourself, at least pay attention to who is and care enough to participate in voting and participate in just paying attention to who's there. So point one is belief, point two is care. The last point is just to try. Mark Twain once said that patriotism is loyalty to one's country all the time and loyalty to the government when it deserves it. I stumbled upon that quote many years ago, and it has since informed many of my decisions and actions when it came to Nigeria. So whether it was by building businesses, protesting policies, or participating in politics, for me, it was always about attempting to be on the side of the people who want to make Nigeria better, want to make Africa better. And that's what I'd like to close with. I hope that I leave you with the dogged determination that in every aspect of your life and in every area of influence that you have, you will do your best to believe, to care, and to try. I hope you realize that in this continent with millions and millions of people, you are the answer to someone's prayer and you have the solution to someone's problem. I hope you recognize that you were created to do something special and specific. And I hope that you find out what that is and you never give up on it. That's been my story. And as I close, I hope I leave you determined to do as I did. May you find the joy in your journey and a reward in your reaching. May you never stop learning, and as you do, never stop teaching. In life, in school, in work, in business, in your career, in visions and in ventures, in the pursuit of purpose, and in the rebuilding of our countries and our continents. Inevitably, you will find that you will win some and you will lose some. On some days, you'll find that you're falling, and on other days, you'll find that you're flying. But until that fateful day when you discover that you are dying, I pray that you never stop trying. God bless Nigeria. God bless Africa. God bless us all. Thank you very much.
Amen and amen. Thank you so much, Mr. Wellington, for those words of wisdom. Mr. Chike Okeke, we would love to hear from you right now.
Thank you. So first and foremost, I would love to thank Ms. Osasu for inviting me today to speak at the fourth edition of this symposium. It is, I think, the theme of the year is timely, it's cogent, and it's pertinent to where we are as a people, especially in this pandemic. Rethinking Africa and of course the role of youths in this current environment. For young people, for those of you who remember, 2 years ago, last year, actually 2019, I ran for office, and there were many people who said, well, why did you do it? You knew you were going to lose. Why did you do it? And that was a question I got over and over and over again during the election and post-election. And the simple truth, which of course I couldn't talk about during the campaign, was this. Our generation has a responsibility to our people, to Nigeria, to West Africa, to the world. And we've watched as our futures have been squandered by the people who have gone before us, whom we hoped would prepare a nation for us to run with. So when I decided to run for office, it was to come understand that process. I told my friends, I said, we complain a lot about the conditions at home, about the state of affairs, but as young people, we hardly engage. So, what role do young people have in rethinking Africa? I was asked to talk about this, but instead I'm posing that as a question for you. What role do you have in restoring leadership, in restoring, pride and integrity in our nation, in Africa? What talents do you have that you can leverage to solve problems in your community, for your nation, for your continent? What skill sets do you have? What things can you learn? What opportunities are out there? What can you take advantage of, right? What people do you need to connect with to help you out? What is it that you need to do to get to the next level, right? So these are questions. Everybody's going to give you advice on what to do. Everybody's going to tell you what they think you should do. But at the end of the day, my challenge to you is to ask yourself, because you know yourself better than any other person, is to ask yourself this: why am I here? What is my purpose here? What have I been put here to do? And how do I start? Once you figure that out, it makes every other thing easier, because now you know who to reach out to talk about what your passions are, to talk about what your interests are, to talk about what social impact you would love to have. And then they can help you, they can guide you, they can mentor you. But you must be able to pick up that mantle, that baton, and say, regardless of what others before me have done, I have a responsibility to myself, to my family, to my community, to my nation, to the continent, to humanity. I'll leave you with that. Now, for those of you who would love to reach out, feel free to, look me up, Chike Ukebu. Connect with me on LinkedIn, on IG, on Twitter. I love to talk to young people with brilliant ideas. I love to help in any ways that I can. So reach out, and let's change our country. Let's save our continent for ourselves and for our children. God bless you all, and God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
God bless you too, Chike. Thank you so much for that. We definitely need more youths as courageous as you are to be able to step up to the plate and actively try to assume these positions of power. Let's hear now from Korepete.
Hello, Africa. My name is Korepete Kalaute. I come from Tawanchu here in South Africa. I am an entrepreneur, I am a speaker, and I'm a consultant in the small business sector, where we render business support services to SMMEs. The global pandemic has taken away so much from us. It has taken away the old ways of doing things professionally and otherwise. But the new normal has brought with it new possibilities and new opportunities. Now, I believe that one of those opportunities is for the youth of Africa to break down the walls that have divided us historically and work towards building a new and better Africa. The youth of Africa are faced with mainly three challenges. Number one is corruption and elitism, which seeks to satisfy the politics of the stomach. Now, here in South Africa, we've had many scandals that came up recently where you'll find that the politically connected individuals have been awarded the contracts to supply PPE to the Department of Health. Number two is rules and regulations. That makes it very difficult for entrepreneurs and professionals alike to get into the professional spaces because of issues like compliance and qualifications. Now, the third one, which I think is critical of them all, it is the issue of the untapped and often ignored demographic dividend that we have in Africa. Now, the African demographic dividend consists mainly of the youth. Now, what we need to do is for Africa to create an economic environment that will allow the youth of Africa to partake in the economy from as early as possible and for as long as possible. This way, they are able to contribute meaningfully to the economy of Africa and make sure that Africa is advanced to the next level. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Korapete, and thank all of you for showing up today. We appreciate you more than you will ever know. I think we can all agree that we, the African youth, truly hold the key to continental development. We must continue to explore these conversations and ensure that we equip ourselves with the skills necessary not just to advocate change for development, but to implement it as well. Because we have the power to do so. We're going to take another intermission, and when we return, we will hear from our second keynote speaker and our final panel of the day. Don't go anywhere.
So long, Instagram.
Bye-bye, Instagram.
Farewell, Facebook.
Sayonara, Twitter.
See you later, followers.
The last person you need to hear from right now is me.
I'm taking a hiatus.
So one day I'm handing over my account
to experts on COVID-19.
People who actually know what they're talking about.
So instead of hearing from me,
you'll be hearing from dozens of experts, like Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Gail Smith, President and CEO of One.
Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, former finance minister of Nigeria.
Listen to what they have to say.
Because you and I aren't safe unless everybody everywhere else is safe.
There's enough knowledge out there. Countries can get ahead of this.
We are just as good as our weakest link. We all have to act as one.
As one.
As one.
As one. So, bye for now.
I'll see you soon.
Break a leg, Doc.
Dr. Ngozi, take it away.
Tostvnetwork mobile app is now available. You can now catch up on our breaking news, stream our programs live, watch out for the latest update on sports and politics as they unfold. You can also get notifications for our upcoming programs and events. All these on our TOS TV Network mobile app, available on Apple Store and Google Play Store. TOS TV News from Africa by Africans.
Being a journalist means in-depth analysis that unravels hidden truths, that question the status quo and fact-checks government,
These criminal elements hiding under the cloak of surveillance contractors are the APC elements.
Do you have facts to prove that? Being a journalist means waking up every day with a burning desire for peace, equity, and justice for all citizens.
We're being told that the choice you have is to take the lesser of two evils.
It means patriotism via the prism of objectivity and accountability. It means giving my platform to the masses to discuss issues that matter to them.
Some of them, if they bring budget, and the budget they look. Some of them sleep. They're going to ask how much you are on. I have it.
Thereby shaping government policies and laws. My name is Osasu and I am the People's Journalist.
Welcome back, beautiful people. You are still tuned into the Osasu Show Symposium. My name is Mike-Bamiloye, and I am your MC for the day. So far, we've heard from former presidents of Nigeria and Malawi, Dr. Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, as well as Dr. Joyce Banda, respectively. We've also heard from a former deputy governor of Nigeria's central bank and presidential candidate, Professor Kingsley Moghalu. We, the youths, have not been left out during this Rethinking Africa Youth Entrepreneurship Panel. We've heard from the world-famous entertainer and entrepreneur Banky W and a host of other inspiring young entrepreneurs from all across the continent. Now, we will hear from our second keynote speaker of the day. Chika Okeke-Agulu is an artist curator and an art historian.
Chika Okeke-Agulu, an artist, curator, and art historian. He is Professor of African and African Diaspora Art at Princeton University. Born in Umuahia, Nigeria, he lives in Princeton, New Jersey, USA. As an art critic, his writings have appeared in The Guardian, Lagos, Daily Times, Lagos, Art Forum International, New York, The New York Times, The Huffington Post, Packet Art Journal, Art South Africa, Johannesburg, and Bonham's Magazine, London. Among his many awards and prizes are Honorable Mention, the Arnold Robin Outstanding Publication Triennial Award, Art Council of African Studies Association 2017, the Melville J. Hetzkovit Prize for the most important scholarly work in African Studies, published in English during the preceding year, African Studies Association 2016, and Frank Joet Mather Award for Distinction in Art Criticism, College Art Association 2016. Okeke-Agulu serves on the advisory boards of the Yonde Tate Research Center, Tate Modern London, the Center for the Study of Visual Art, National Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C., and the Africa Institute, Sharjah, UAE. He is on the executive board of Princeton in Africa and editorial board of African Studies Review.
Thank you. I wish to express my thanks to the organizers of this symposium, especially Osasu Ibinedion, the CEO of the Osasu Foundation. I hope that our deliberations today will contribute to the necessary work of imagining Africa's future, even in the shadow of this pandemic. While it is impossible to forecast when or how COVID-19 will end or the full extent of its rampage across the globe, it is certain that Africa is in for a very difficult time. And the question before us today is this: how might we imagine and actualize Africa's economic sovereignty and good society out of the ruins of the past and the challenges of the present? I speak today as an artist and art historian. After initially training and teaching at the University of Nigeria in Nsukka, I have spent the past 20 years as a US-based scholar in African and African diaspora art. Given this background, I suspect that some might wonder why I am giving a keynote at a symposium on rethinking Africa. After all, some might say, art and culture do not really matter when we are talking about the serious subject of reimagining a politically stable, economically viable, and socially progressive Africa. But here's the thing. Art and culture not only matter, they are crucial to Africa's future. Let me tell you why. Africa's yesterday was one long story of depredation by European powers in the era of chattel slavery and colonization. Whether it is the degradation of the human population or systematic exploitation of its natural resources, the outcome was that the continent had tremendous disadvantage in its march toward modernity after its decolonization. While negative stories about Africa were used to justify the dehumanization of Africans, Africans themselves, like the classic victim of abuse, all but lost faith in their own humanity, disconnected from long histories of tremendous social, political, and cultural achievements of their ancestors. So while Europe stole, seized, and looted the finest examples of African art and filled their museums with them, Africa, still dealing with the trauma of colonization and bad governance, has not shown the capacity to take ownership of its history in all its complexity and sophistication. And I'm saying that until Africa takes charge of recovering its histories on its own terms, it cannot meaningfully account for its present, much less imagining a competitive future without relying, sadly, on the same sources that for centuries forced it into a state of God-forsaken disadvantage. And the tool for this task is the arts and humanities. But how? Well, consider this. For all the scientific and technological inventions of ancient Greece, Rome, Islamic medieval empires, Renaissance Italy, and medieval modern Europe, the place ordinary people go to learn about the achievements of their societies is the Art and Culture Museum. These institutions safeguard art and artifacts that testify to the past glories of these societies. They also educate their audiences about the past and justify their present triumphs in all fields of human endeavor. So I want to reiterate that the establishment of museums as repositories of artistic and cultural memories and achievements is fundamental to the task of building a progressive society in which the people take ownership of their past and confident about their march into the future. Therefore, two major issues must be on the agenda as Africa rethinks its path forward. First, we need a concerted campaign to bring back significant examples of Africa's high artistic and cultural achievements, most of which were stolen and looted by Europeans during the colonial period. These extremely valuable objects can be found in major Western museums and frequently appear in auction sales. For instance, the stunning 2008 exhibition of Royal Benin art organized by a leading museum in Austria consisted mostly of some of the thousands of artworks looted from the Oba's palace by British soldiers in 1897. By some account, up to 95% of Africa's cultural heritage is held in museums outside Africa. That's no longer defensible. In recent years, calls for restitution by African nations, leaders, scholars, and activists have grown louder, so much so that the French President Emmanuel Macron announced 2 years ago that France shall return all objects illegally taken from Africa, but only if their rightful owners asked for their return. Everyone now understands that this is one significant step toward correcting the colonial era cultural injustices done to Africa. And African stakeholders must lead the charge to reclaim their cultural heritage for the spiritual and economic benefit of its peoples and societies. Second, Africa must prepare new homes for both its repatriated and locally held priceless artifacts. In this, there is some good news from around the continent. In Egypt, the enormous Grand Egyptian Museum, which will house and display the country's finest arts, is set to open soon. Apart from its cultural significance, it stands to boost earnings from tourism, which already contributes up to 11% of Egypt's GDP. In Senegal, the world-class Museum of Black Civilizations, which opened 2 years ago, is now poised to receive repatriated African artifacts and put Senegal in a good position to attract visitors from the African diaspora. And a few years ago, the Zeitz Museum of Contemporary African Art opened in Cape Town to show the world Africa's best artists. It is now arguably the city's top tourist attraction. Consider this. Lagos, we know, is one of the world's largest cities. Yet it is its only museum is that small and unremarkable national museum built by the colonial government. As we reimagine Africa's future, it is imperative to insist on the place of art and culture, not just as repositories of history or symbols of Africa's cultural achievements, but as powerful engines of our future economies and healthy civic life. Building new museums will make clear to the West that Africa is serious about taking possession of its looted, priceless cultural heritage. It will also show that we are investing in art and culture to deliver alongside science, technology, and good governance, and livable Africa.
Thank you so much, Professor, for that remarkable address. I do believe I speak for all Africans when I say this is a topic that is so dear to our heart, so it's amazing to hear you speak so passionately about it. Our arts and culture are the pride of we the youth, and it's exciting to hear the emphasis that the role of arts and culture can play in rethinking and repositioning Africa for a greater tomorrow. So once again, we just want to say thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Mr. MC, and thank you again to Osasu for inviting me. It has been a pleasure and honor being part of these important conversations about Africa's future.
You are most welcome, Professor. In Rethinking Africa, there are key decision makers that cannot be left out of the conversation. They wield the capital and the network needed to reposition Africa's trajectory. So please, permit me to introduce Professor Benedict Orama. He is the president and chairman of the board of directors of the African Export and Import Bank.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, sir. Also joining him in this fireside chat, we have Gail E. Smith. Gail is the president and CEO of the One Campaign.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Last but definitely not the least, we have Professor P.L.O. Lumumba. He is a professor of public law.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Professor.
He is the immediate former director and chief executive officer of the Kenya School of Law, a former secretary of the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission, and a former director of the defunct Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission, KACC, now Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, EACC. He is a renowned legal practitioner. He currently practices law with Lumumba and Lumumba Advocate and coordinate activities under the aegis of the PLO Lumumba Foundation. He has been named and recognized by the International Commission of Jurists Kenya Section and the Law Society of Kenya for his exemplary contribution to the legal profession. He was awarded a Lifetime Achievement for Patriotism and Advocacy by the African Forum 2017 and was the recipient of the 2008 Martin Luther King Africa Salute to Greatness Award by the Martin Luther King Jr. Africa Foundation. In January 2018, he received the following awards and recognition: African Luminary Award by African Cultural Association in the United States of America, Freedom of the City of Lowell in the Commonwealth, Massachusetts in the United States of America for his role in the fight against corruption and bad governance in Africa. Recognition by the House of Representatives of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the United States of America for exemplary work in the fight against corruption and bad governance in Africa. She served as a top advisor on development issues for 2 American presidents and is one of the world's leading experts on global development. She brings an unparalleled expertise on development and democracy issues and an extraordinary network of relationships across the African continent and around the world. In her most recent role, Administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, Smith led a staff of more than 10,000 people working to end extreme poverty, foster sustained and inclusive economic growth, promote resilient, democratic societies all over the world. Smith had previously served as Special Assistant to President Obama and Senior Director for Development and Democracy at the National Security Council and as Special Assistant to President Clinton and Senior Director for African Affairs at the National Security Council. As the President of Afreximbank, Professor Orama has significantly grown the bank and increased its global appeal. The bank is playing a leading role in the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Professor Orama has led the creation of digital platforms that are expected to boost intra-regional trade and revolutionize cross-border payments in Africa. Under his leadership, Afreximbank is supporting the harmonization of standards and the development of quality infrastructure across Africa. It has also started implementing the Collaborative Transit Guarantee Scheme for Africa to make it easier and more efficient to move goods across the continent. Professor Orama is currently actively supporting the continental response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Through direct financing to African public and private sector, the bank is helping to mitigate the economic impact of the pandemic. As the chair of the Board of Trustees of the African Union COVID-19 Response Fund, President Orama is helping to coordinate grant mobilization and efficient utilization across Africa, as well as coordinating the efficient procurement and distribution of medical materials among African countries. He is also leading other continental and private sector initiatives to scale up Africa's health and economic response to the pandemic. Professor Orama was recently decorated by His Excellency Vladimir Putin, President of the Russia Federation, with the Russian State Award of the Order of Friendship and by the Cameroonian government with the Knight of the National Order. He was also voted African Banker of the Year by the African Banker magazine in 2017, and in December 2019 he received an honorary Doctor of Science degree in Agricultural Economics from the Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife, Nigeria.
Thank you all once again for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here. Professor Lumumba, if I may, I would like to start with you. How would you rate the effectiveness of the leadership in Africa since the beginning of the pandemic?
First, let me say that when we talk about Africa, sometimes we talk about her as if she were one country. We talk about Africa as if she were one country like the United States of America or like India or like China. Let us remember that Africa is divided into 55 independent and sovereign states, and that therefore their reaction to any situation, including the COVID pandemic, is informed by certain realities within their geographical space. But I'm also aware that science knows no boundaries. And that is why in our responses, even as countries, we have allowed ourselves largely to be guided by the stipulations of the World Health Organization and those of the Centers for Disease Control in Africa to the extent that they have been useful. So that the domestic situation as it is in Kenya or in Tanzania or in Uganda has borrowed something from the prescriptions of the World Health Organization as informed by the realities. And this pandemic, this COVID pandemic, is one that has been unique. The world has been learning on the go. And if you doubted me, see how ravaging it has been in countries such as the United States of America, which one thought would have been the most prepared nation on earth, because it's the richest nation on earth. See how devastating it was in Spain and Italy. See how it was devastating, it is still devastating in India and even in China itself. So African countries, in my view, have responded to this very unique and unprecedented situation in generally a sound way. And it has not been uniform. In Rwanda and Uganda, which had the opportunity, and I'm using the word opportunities very deliberately, to deal with the Ebola pandemic or epidemic, depending on which term you want to use, responded very vigorously because they had had the advantage and the learning of dealing with Ebola. Kenya also, in its own way, had a mix of what they called a lockdown, but chose for economic reasons not to go into the whole hog, except in the hotspots of Nairobi at one time and Mombasa at one time and Mandera. That has also been a response informed by science. Burundi was a little bit nonchalant, and that can be understood in the context of the politics of the day. They thought that God would help them, but there was also an element in which they did not disrespect science. Tanzania took another trajectory, which was informed by science, contrary to what some commentators are saying. It was informed by science, and that science is that you closed the schools, and they did. You closed public sporting facilities, and that they did, but don't lock down. Don't lock down because science tells us that you can have herd immunity. And that particular approach was also utilized by Sweden. It was utilized by Taiwan. It was utilized by South Korea. And the jury is still out as to which is the most effective method. As we now know, the countries that chose lockdowns, like the United States of America, are the most affected. Brazil are the most affected. Italy was affected. Spain was affected. And therefore, I hold the view that African governments, each one of them, whichever path they took, have done a reasonably commendable job. You can talk about how South Africa only the other day reduced their level of lockdown to level 2, which now allows people to go into pubs in numbers of 50. A number of countries are opening their skies. And I think that nobody prepared for this pandemic. The world has never seen a pandemic whose effects have been so devastating as this one has been. On a scale of 1 to 10, I give African governments 7 out of 10 in terms of their response. I've seen leadership.
7 out of 10. That's pretty good. That's not bad at all. Thank you so much for that. Professor, if I may ask you, what does the concept of rethinking Africa mean to you?
At the risk of sounding romantic, but without being romantic, in answering the question, rethinking Africa, permit me to say that this question has been around for a long time, but I'll not delve into the depths of history. But yet again, I must go to 1906 in a speech delivered by a great South African and African Pixley Kaisa Kaseme when he was a student at the University of Columbia in 1906. He delivered a speech entitled Regeneration of Africa. In that speech, he said that Africa has always been a great continent. He reminded his audience that this is the mother continent, this is the cradle of civilization, this is the continent that housed the great libraries of Timbuktu, this is the continent that gave birth to Mansa Musa and the Ascent Hen, and this is the continent that gave birth to the Benin walled cities. This is the continent that was the home of great things, the civilized kingdoms of the Baganda, of the Ashanti, of the Zulu, of Monomotapa Empire. This is the home of many things, but this continent, he recognized, has been abused by other civilizations through slavery, through colonization, and it continues even through the neo-colonial project. So that when we talk about Africa, it is a continent that has fought to regain her dignity, to regain her independence through the veritable struggles of the independence to defeat colonization. This is a continent that has fallen down times without number, but it continues to rise. And I think that this is a continent that sometimes is judged too harshly, judges ourselves too harshly, defined by others. It never defines ourselves. Going forward, we as a continent must now define ourselves. We must not allow any civilization to define us. The Caucasians, the British defined us. The French defined us. The Portuguese defined us. The Germans defined us. The Arabs defined us. The Spaniards defined us. The Belgians defined us. Everybody has been in the business of defining us. But we must now exorcise that ghost and embrace our own self-definition. And as I define Africa, I define her as the mother continent, the home of civilization, the cradle of civilization. And this is the time for her leaders, her young men and women, to rise up. It is true that some of the leaders who took the mantle of leadership in Africa when we regained our independence allowed themselves to be manipulated by the erstwhile colonial powers. They have abused and raped the continent and visited pain through corruption and civil wars and genocide on the continent. But the time is now. Out of the womb of this problem, young men and women must now rise up. They must rise up in South Africa. They must rise up in Central Africa. They must rise up in North Africa. They must rise up in West Africa. They must rise up in East Africa and rise up and canalize their energies in a manner that will help Africa and catapult her into the orbit of development. And I want Africa, when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, our young men and women ought to be there. When we talk about the revolution in the pharmaceutical industries, I want us to make our own medicine. I want us to make our own aeroplanes. I want us to add value to our own minerals. I want us to have a single currency. I want us to have a single passport. I want us to be a continent that thinks as one. Perhaps, and I hope it is true, that under Africa Agenda 2063, Africa is going to think differently. And with the initiation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, we shall now dissolve the boundaries, the artificial boundaries that imprison us. And this is why I must agree with Julius Kambarage Nyerere of Tanzania when on the 6th day of March 1997, while speaking on the 40th anniversary of the independence of Ghana, he said that the beauty is that despite the attempts of our leaders to assert our Tanzanian-ness, our Ghanaian-ness, our Kenyan-ness, our Ugandan-ness, our Ethiopian-ness, our Zambian-ness, the world still sees us just as one. So the time is now to dissolve those boundaries and retain them only for purposes of administration. We can and we must, And history has demonstrated times without number that when young men and women rise, countries rise. This is the time for African countries to reclaim their self-esteem in every area. In the sports, this is not the time to celebrate foreign teams in Europe and America. This is the time to rebuild football into a multi-million-dollar industry. This is the time for us to recognize that the dramatization in Hollywood is not useful to us. The dramatization must be in Nollywood. The dramatization must be in Bongowood. It must be in Riverwood. And I believe that there is a tide in our affairs. This is the time. These are the floods upon whose crest we must ride. And Africa will be great. This thing that Africa is a deadbeat continent is a calculated, diabolical machination by those who want to subjugate Africa to make us repose in slumber. We must refuse. So let us go out there to create the big ocean that is in Africa. Each one of us must play our part. Let us be a big tree in a big forest. Let us be good trees as individuals that we may make a forest that will make Africa visible and great for this generation and generations yet to be born. In this quest, the approach of leadership must not only be co-generational, but intergenerational. It shall be done, it must be done, because we cannot afford otherwise. God bless you.
Professor Lumumba, there are no words sufficient enough to describe how much we appreciate your time and your passionate response. I have to be honest, I've had goosebumps listening to you, and I do believe our audience from all across Africa and all around the world will agree with me. Thank you so much for everything you do for us. Let me bring in President Orama. President Orama, the COVID-19 pandemic stopped the world in its tracks. How would you assess Africa's response to the pandemic, and what are some of the initiatives that the Africa Export-Import Bank in rethinking Africa by making the continent more self-reliant and efficient?
Thank you very much, Osasu, for bringing me to speak in this edition of the Osasu show. It is a great pleasure to be here and to speak about something that is in everybody's mind. The COVID-19 pandemic and Africa's response to that pandemic. Everybody knows very well the journey the continent had taken since March 11, when the WHO declared the COVID-19 a pandemic. Everybody knows about the scramble for COVID-19 materials that ensued, and how many wealthy countries kind of cornered the supplies of all of this. There were worries about the continent. Those worries were not misplaced, because the continent was seen as very vulnerable to the disease, vulnerable in terms of inadequacy of its health infrastructure, vulnerable in terms of fiscal inadequacies, lack of fiscal space to invest in what will be required to contain the pandemic and reduce infection and death, vulnerable in terms of the economic consequences of such a pandemic. So it was really very pleasing that the African Union quickly responded. They launched a joint continental strategy for containing the COVID-19, which was done by the African Ministers of Health. Just immediately, the pandemic became a serious matter. And in April, the AU Bureau of Heads of State approved that continental strategy. That then provided a platform for the African Union and the Africa CDC to begin to work in support of the different countries in the continent with regard to this pandemic. It is important that we pursue as a continent a coordinated approach, because 55 countries, 84,000 kilometers of borders. Some of the borders are very, as we know, quite porous. So a disease in one country is a disease in another country. So it was important that we came together. It was also important that we leverage all means of efficiency gains that we could leverage. If each country tried to do things on its own, we would lose that opportunity. So what then happened was that under the strategy, a number of things were envisaged. That the continent would put in place a COVID-19 response fund. This was announced, and I'm really pleased that I was appointed to chair that fund. I chair the board of trustees of the fund. And the fund has been mandated by the African Union to help raise financing, not only for containing the disease, but also for dealing with the other socioeconomic consequences. It was also supposed to help to deal with pooled procurement of COVID materials to avoid the situation we saw in some other countries, where even within countries, different sovereigns, states, were competing for the acquisition of COVID materials, thereby beating up the price. The outcome of all of that is that so far that the response fund has been able to raise more than $100 million, but the target is to raise $600 million. So there will be a launch that we'll be doing in October that will be used to help mobilize additional funding for the fund. But through the effort of the AU and the Africa CDC, the Afrexim Bank, UNECA, Africa CDC, Mr. Stripe Masiwa, the AU envoy in charge of procurement, collaborated to put in place an Africa medical supplies platform, which is being operated by Django. This is an e-commerce platform that is open to African governments and the hospitals and NGOs for the procurement of COVID materials on a pooled basis. Afrexim Bank is providing payment services under the platform. What has happened with the platform is that through the effort of the AU chairperson, His Excellency President Ramaphosa, and the work of the AU envoy, Mr. Masiwa, and others, Africa has been able to negotiate what they call the Africa quota from different suppliers and reduce the price of some of the material by up to 40%. But beyond that, the Afrexim Bank has also been doing other things to support the continent at this time. We launched a pandemic trade impact mitigation facility in March to help the continent support the continent to procure COVID materials, to help the different countries, the banks and the corporations to adjust in an orderly manner to the economic shock brought by the pandemic. As we speak, we've disbursed over $5 billion under this facility. This has benefited banks, corporations, and countries all over Africa. We also launched, in collaboration with the UN Economic Commission for Africa, a special facility at the level of $200 million, which has been made available, is being made available to African corporates to enable them produce COVID materials within the continent. This is because we found that at the height of the crisis, many countries could not have access because the richer countries kind of cornered supply of these materials. It was important that we begin to build regional supply chains so we can produce even the basic things that the personal protective equipment, test kits, and other things that are required. Beyond all of this, the big thing we are all pursuing, we should not lose sight of the focus. We must take COVID-19 as just a distraction. The focus is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. There was a slight disappointment because trading that was supposed to start in July was postponed to January because of the COVID-19. But we believe January start of trading is good. It will enable proper preparation to enable countries to adjust to the crisis that we have today so that we can start the trading with the big bank. Afrexim Bank is not relenting in preparing for this. We are about to launch the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, which we're piloting in 6 countries, including Nigeria, in a couple of months, and then expand to the rest of Africa. This will make it possible for Africans to pay for intra-African trade in their local currencies. We've already completed the African Customer Due Diligence Repository platform. We are about to open it for subscription in the next couple of weeks. The Trade Information Portal, which we see as very critical for promoting trade, for opening the market, is also about ready and will be open just before the trading starts. We also have now signed with the COMESA to begin to offer the collaborative transit guarantee scheme, which we hope will cover the whole continent. This will make it easier for goods to move across borders, make it cheaper for those goods to move across borders. So we are working very hard to make sure that we will soon put this pandemic behind us and then continue to deal with the big issue before us, trading more amongst ourselves, using the trade to grow our economies, using the trade to take our destiny as a continent into our hands. I thank you again for this opportunity and look forward to seeing you again in the future, and hope you will have a wonderful event celebrating the 4th edition of Osasu Show. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor, for that in-depth response. We appreciate you and we appreciate your time. I would like to ask you, though, we are aware that you are the chairperson of the fund set up by the African Union to combat COVID-19. How can Africans who are watching from all across the world, no matter where they are, how can they contribute to this fund and be a part of the solution?
Thank you very much, MC. That is a very good question. As I mentioned in my earlier remarks, the AU COVID-19 Response Fund has a target to raise $600 million. And this money is supposed to be used to help the continent to procure some COVID materials, to send first responders, to enable countries that need urgent supply of food and certain kinds of emergency materials to get access to all of this. Today, most of the donors to the fund are government, the African government, and also some foreign government. We want the everyday African to get involved. Some have started doing so, but it's not enough. We are still very far away. This is a time for us to show that we love our continent, that we can solve our own problems. So the everyday African, as we worry about this pandemic, as we hope that it will go away, we have to also do something to make sure it actually goes away. So we are inviting each and every one of you to make a donation. Now amount is too small. You have to make a donation to the fund. If you go to the website of the COVID Response Fund, the African Union COVID Response Fund, you will be able to see how to make the donation. We are also going to host a webinar, an event, as a matter of fact, in October, early October. It will be advertised broadly and widely. I encourage you to try and join that event During that event, you will learn more about the fund. You will learn more about how to donate. You will learn more about what the fund is doing today, how it has sent first responders, how it has made it possible for some countries to get supplies, how it has saved lives, and how it is planning to even do more so that we can turn around the corner with regard to this pandemic and then face the economic challenges that is before us.
Thank you so much, Professor Orama. Speaking on behalf of the African youth, I can firmly say that we appreciate your efforts in moving this continent forward. I believe the one thing that's clear throughout this whole symposium is that we all have a role to play in rethinking Africa, and we must step up to the plate now without further delay. Please allow me to bring in the president of the One Campaign, Gail E. Smith. Thank you once again for joining us. From the initial reaction of world leaders in hoarding personal protective equipments, ventilators, medication, and other valuable response aid, what lessons about self-sufficiency can Africa take away from this pandemic? And what are Africa's development partners, such as the One Campaign, doing to build back better and differently post-COVID-19 pandemic?
I'm delighted to be participating, in fact, honored to be participating in the Osasu Show Symposium. Look, these issues are really, really important as we look at what may be a new normal. I want to start off by thanking and giving some real credit to Africa and Africa's leadership. You know, at the onset of this pandemic, we watched around the world as there was a literal food fight for PPEs, for therapeutics, for the medical equipment that our health workers so desperately needed. Africa did something different, which was to build this Africa Medical Supplies platform, which allows for aggregate buying, efficiency, effectiveness, and most important, collaboration. And one of the key ingredients in fighting this pandemic is that collaboration and the investment of the political capital it took to build the platform. So that's just a really great signal. It's a great thing for the continent. I think it sends a message to the rest of the world that this is how we need to do it. But I think we also know that the stakes here are enormously high. We are looking at the first increase in extreme poverty in 20 years, a recession striking Africa, countries having to make hard choices between responding to the pandemic or responding to the impacts of the pandemic. Lockdown has had some very good effects, but we all know it's had massive economic consequences. And that the economic burden now, given that tourism has dried up, that foreign direct investment has slowed, that people have lost jobs, means that we are dealing with multiple crises at the same time. We at the One Campaign have been campaigning for a global response. And I have to say here, we've not yet seen what we need. Individual countries are doing some things, but we're not seeing that global unity in the way I just described that we're seeing it in Africa, but we need to do what's necessary. And in our view, what's necessary is an extended debt service moratorium. What does that mean? That means just giving countries the fiscal space to manage economies that have lost key sources of revenue. It means looking at SDR, special drawing rights from the IMF, so that there are other ways to inject capital into economies across many countries that have made extraordinary strides over the last many years. It's all about protecting the progress that's been made up to now. The other things we got to think about is what else can be done here in the long term. A lot of people talk about building back better. We think there's an issue about how can we build back differently. For the entire world, that means how do we prepare? We know these viral threats are going to come to us again. How do we make sure that every country on the planet has the ability to prevent, detect, and respond to these kinds of threats? And look, we've seen what the African continent can do. Look what happened during the Ebola epidemic. 3 countries supported by healthcare workers from all over the world, including 900 from Africa, beat back the most lethal epidemic we had seen in modern times. So we know it can be done, but we've also got to grapple with things like the dependence of Africa on imports across the pharmaceutical, medical, and health sectors. How do we make the investments together that can mean that more of those things can be produced at home, that there's less dependence? How do we build the capacity in a health sector that has improved dramatically over the last 25 years in the fight against AIDS, malaria, TB, again, Ebola, to strengthen that capacity? How do we grow the resources so that countries can finance their own development? We will continue to champion and fight for the cause of overseas development assistance, foreign aid, but it isn't the solution. It's a tool on the way. It needs to be used for building capacity, and in those cases where nothing else for a temporary period can work. So we'll keep doing that, but at the same time, we all need to work together to make sure we see the increased capital flows. We see the success of the Continental Free Trade Area as the largest untapped market on the earth comes together for more internal trade and to be a huge and important economic bloc in the global economy. All of these are issues we need to think about. How do we fight a fire right now while preventing the next one? And how do we think now about rebuilding? There are huge challenges. I'm one who believes that even as we face crises, we can build from them and take lessons from them. I think ours, is invest in capacity. Capacity, capacity, capacity. Africa's shown what it can do to build that capacity and to act on it. I think the second is to act in unity, in concert, and collaboratively. A virus like this, climate change, many of the challenges we face don't pay attention to borders and in fact exploit disunity. So the second is, how do we work together and collaborate more effectively? The third is, how do we invest political capital? These things don't happen by sheer will alone. How do we marry political capital, data, science, and evidence, and make sure that our citizens are fully engaged, and not just those who are doing their part by participating in a lockdown, by sacrificing, but are also part of building, changing, and growing.
Thank you so much, Gail. Professor Orama, Professor Lumumba, Gail Smith, we cannot thank you enough for your time. We appreciate it so much.
Look, I want to thank you very, very much for inviting me to participate. Again, I'm truly honored. My hope is that these conversations will yield tangible things that together we can fight and campaign for, and we're with you all the way. Thanks very much.
So thank you very much once again for this opportunity. I hope that the rest of the event goes very well. But beyond that, I hope that the outcome will lead to what we all looking for, to lead to activities and ideas that will help us achieve the Africa we want. An Africa where we are taking our own destiny in our own hands, an Africa where we trade more amongst ourselves in the context of intra-African trade and intra-African investment, an Africa where we move away from commodities and begin to export value-added items, an Africa where we are able to employ more and more of our people, where we reduce unemployment, where we rely less on aid and do more business. An Africa where our creative diversity can become an asset, where we are going to see the young with all the aspirations realized, where we're going to be able to look after elderly, sick, without always going out like beggars seeking aid from others who also have their problems to solve. Thank you, and I hope we are able to take forward what I believe are the laudable goals of this event.
Thank you very much, my good friend Osasu Igbenedion. You are a good midwife for a process that will make Africa the great continent that it is. I am PLO Lumumba of Africa. God bless you.
Thank you, everyone. God bless you all. We have had so much feedback from social media. We have participants from Tanzania, from Rwanda, South Africa, Ghana, Cameroon, all sending in their comments online. This conversation on Rethinking Africa cannot and will not end here. We must all be ambassadors for a new Africa. Our speakers here today are clearly equipped with the requisite knowledge to experience and lead the charge on this very important movement. Young and old, now we know that we all have a role to play, and we must all take advantage of the opportunities presented by this COVID-19 crisis to rebrand and rethink the way we operate. I have come to the end of my duties as MC. It's been a pleasure being here with you today. Please allow me to hand over to the convener for her closing remarks. Again, my name is Mike-Bamiloye. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and may God bless all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mali. That was amazing. Can we have another round of applause for Mali? Amazing job. Thank you so much to all our distinguished panelists and audience for your time. The ability to gather thought leaders like yourselves here today is truly an honor and a privilege that I do not take for granted. I thank you all for your passion for Africa and willingness to unleash her greatness. I assure you I will continue to do my part in empowering Africans and to continue to hold discussions that will move our continent forward. As I leave you today, I must leave you with a token of my appreciation, albeit how small. So please permit me to call on the stage members of the Osasu Show Foundation, TOSTVNetwork, Mali, our MC of the day again, and my co-producer of the 4th edition of the Osasu Show Symposium, Nathaniel Ogutre, to assist me in unveiling this little token of my appreciation to you all. Thank you so
Congratulations.
much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Congratulations, man.
Awesome. So on behalf of all of us at TOS TV Network and the Osasu Show Foundation, we present to you the 4th TOS Symposium magazine, which you can download for free right now on our website, www.tostvnetwork.com. This magazine will keep you abreast of conversations regarding this year's theme, as well as highlights of the past 3 editions. Until next year, stay safe, stay in touch via all the details showing on your screens. Thank you once again, and may God bless the United Nations of Africa. Thank you.
Congratulations, everyone. Congratulations.